All right, welcome back to the Sexy Business Podcast. I am Spooky Dangerous, and I'm joined as ever with Lewd Neko. We are here this time to be talking about how to get your start in adult game dev. There is a lot of big names in the space and many small ones, and a lot of us run on the same similar kind of Patreon model and have games on Steam, games on itch.io, and a lot of that store presence kind of stuff is really obvious seeing it from the outside, but we want to talk about how you can get up to that point and how you can get yourself started. I started off with Ren'Py, which is the current engine that we currently use, and Ren'Py is dead simple. It's much more like writing dialogue for a TV show than it is making a game, and I think that's why it works really well for me. But it's also like a directorial thing. Like you're doing a shot composition, you go, okay, this is the background, this is the character standing on whichever location, this is the expression that they have on their face, this is what's being said. So it is kind of like screenwriting, and I found that really easy. I made a game. It's pretty shit as my first project. I mean, everything is when you're starting out, right? But the passion is what makes it exciting and fun and different. It's basically fan fiction, except I had created all original characters but it just like plays on all the existing tropes of the thing that it's ripping on. And then I found an artist that I liked, and I was like, actually, we could make bank if we used the game dev thing as a model to monetize the art style. And this artist was CubeZ, as all THM fans know, our original artist.
Oh yeah.
CubeZ, who is currently on sabbatical. Basically, I pitched and I was like, okay, hi, look, this is what I want to do. Here's a link to the game itself. You can have a look at it and how the different characters interact and stuff like that. This is kind of how we would build things. We would work together to create the characters and the story and the setting and all this kind of stuff. Which a lot of it was like, what are you going to be enthusiastic about drawing? Because I'm going to be happy building out however it works together. And then in the time since then, we found other writers and other artists to come and join and do different projects and work on stuff like that. But everything's built in Ren'Py. Everything is about having an artist illustrate the character and then setting the characters up in the scene so that they're all together and talking to each other. So if you're an illustrator, you can be doing this yourself. Picking up Ren'Py is way easier than picking up something like Photoshop or CSP or anything like that. And then building a product. And if you're already having all these marketing assets because you've drawn characters and you've created these things, it's very easy to go, well, here's the game. Here's the character. Oh, you like the character? Here's the game.
So I'm not a game dev because in my head I always pronounce Ren'Py Ren'Py.
It's because it's short for Python. So it's, Ren'Py. I know, it sounds dumb. Instead of like Ren and Stimpy, where it's Ren'Py. I feel like they're the two paths that you choose to go down when you enter game dev.
Yeah, it kind of, and Ren'Py is kind of similar to like RPG Maker, where it's pretty accessible, especially to artists, because RPG Maker is another one where I know a lot of artists will basically just kind of create games that just loosely connect their art.
Yeah, I personally hate RPG makers, but it's very much like I picked Ren'Py, my dogshit software, and I hate you for supporting your dogshit software. It's incredibly hypercritical, and I'm aware of that. But RPG Maker has the same sort of thing, right? We are able to build out a game. You can have a character that walks around and interacts with things, and you're able to do level design and create puzzles and stuff like that. My main gripe of these particular games is the people that make them don't have the skills to do good actual game design, and what they are trying to do is narrative design and character stuff, which works better in Ren'Py. If you had really good puzzle development or map design or something like that, where I'm not just wandering around lost for hours while I'm trying to keep it hard, is not that fun to me. But you still see a lot of artists come and do this where they have really high quality 2D art that shows up when people are talking or shows up during impactful scenes. And the game engine is just a delivery of the narrative and a delivery of, like getting to know the characters and this kind of dating sim aspects a lot of the time. We're able to gamify the parasocial experience, so to say, because in streaming and lewd tubing and stuff like that, a lot of what you're selling is the interaction with you and the familiarity with a character or a person and that sort of parasocial experience. Whereas with a game, the person playing has a lot more freedom and to make choices in who and how they interact with things, and a lot more control over what the other person is going to be doing because of the limitations of the game. And I think that appeals to people in the same way that a stream does, but it gives you the ability to explore and all this kind of stuff as well.
Oh yeah, and I mean, like, part of the reason why I haven't streamed or even own a lot of RPG Maker games is precisely because of that problem. Oftentimes, the gameplay is just like bad RPG mechanics that are really boring, and you have to grind forever for like a single CG, and it's just like this isn't fun. But there are like a couple of games that really do actually make the gameplay relevant. So, like, it's actually interesting. Like one I played was Second Brewery, which is a really interesting like mix of like bartender mechanics, like bar management in a like RPG Maker, which is really creative, but it was also really fun. Like I enjoyed that they were trying to do something new with like the RPG Maker porn game sort of system. And then along with that, there also wasn't much of like the getting lost part, which I think I've experienced sometimes with RPG Maker games because the game was pretty like had a small map, which made sense for the game. I don't want to have to wander through like, a bunch of empty landscapes just to get to like one NPC.
Yeah, I have this problem a lot with AAA games. I bounced off The Witcher 3 because I completed what was possibly the first section. You defeat like a griffin or something. And then the quest marker, the next quest is like, go to this place. A place that you've never heard the name of before. And I'm like, okay, where is that? We're not going to tell you. I'm like, okay. I spend an hour wandering around and then I turn off the game and never play it again. Because if you can't even set me on the course that you're asking me to go on, like it's not even like explore, find out what your next thing is, where you find a quest marker that sends you down a thing. It's like, no. We know the answer. We're just not going to tell you. And you can waste time figuring it out. And that shits me because I want to be doing something. I'm really objective oriented. And I don't know if you can tell that in the way that the Vampire games are designed. Cufflinks and Cages is the complete opposite, where you're intended to have no control over what you're really doing, and the game just interacts with you, which is supposed to be the keyholder caged experience, where the game acts as the keyholder and you just have to do as you're told. But as you're a player coming up to play a game, you're like, I have no control over the game. This sucks. I'm like, well, you're not supposed to. Damn it.
And I think with like, porn games in particular, like you have to manage that sort of like player frustration or like player patience because generally speaking, people who are playing porn games are going to have like a much lower levels of patience if you're really spacing out like the lewd content too far. With the exception of like the dating sim, where like sometimes it's expected that like, okay, you have to go through all the romance and people enjoy that part before you get to the sex. But if you want your game to be really like lewd oriented and kink oriented and sex oriented and things like that, and if you have a bunch of bullshit that's not fun that connects the lewd scenes, there's a good chance people are just going to look up the CG gallery online.
Yeah, and especially some Vampire games ships, you can literally just open the files and all of the CGs are in there and just look at them and then go, okay, I saw everything now. But I do want to talk about two different models for game. The first one is like the classic dating sim. Amoris, for example, uses this, which is the roller coaster. It's a long, slow build, and then you have your big, impactful scene, and then you finish the arc. Right? You have the wee all the way down the end, and then you come back to the start. Which is like the long, slow build is the romancing the character and learning about them, all this kind of stuff. You get to the end of the arc, you have the impactful sex scene, and that's it. You come back to the start and you go, okay, maybe I choose a different character. And then the other one is the heartbeat model. I think it's Prince of Suburbia. Some of these words might be wrong, but I think the formatting is correct. Is one that does this as well, where you will have a minor scene which is like 1 to 2 images at like a fixed pace. They'll be like, okay, we're talking about plot. Something is happening. Maybe you're going to a different location. Here is a minor scene. We need a reason for you to go to the doctor. Okay, that's part of the plot. Sick. All right. You're at the doctor and you have to fuck because we need to have a minor scene at exactly this interval. So you're gonna fuck the doctor. You're like, okay, shit. Here I am. And you can kind of tell where it goes. Okay, here's a thing. Here's an impactful scene. Here's some plot. Here's development. Here's relationship building or whatever. And it's kind of steady like that. And I think some of our games kind of do the same thing. Shackles of Elsewhere is trying to do the heartbeat model, where it's like, okay, here is the thing that's happening. Here is some action. Here's the thing that's happening. Oh, do you want to diverge to this character or to this character to follow a different route? Here's some action. But it's a bit more obvious in your choices. In Prince of Suburbia, I don't actually know that you have much control over what you see from memory. Or maybe I just picked the most basic bitch plotline, I guess. And then thinking about how the game design and stuff like that works, applying that to the RPG Maker thing, right? If you're doing a slow build, like the roller coaster, then you have to go, okay, how much time of this is walking? How much time of this is narrative development? Is the reward payoff long and big enough to justify the time spent to get there? Is the person going to be invested enough in the character at that point to care? Like, if you're watching an anime and you're like, this is my waifu, she's had 6 minutes of screen time, but I absolutely love her, and then something comes on and they're really cool and shit, you're like, yeah, hell yeah, you have to know that the payoff for it is worth the wait. Whereas if it's more of a heartbeat model, it'll be like, okay, I come here and I do this. I think Tales of Androgyny actually does a pretty good job of the heartbeat model. But the problem with that one specifically is if you get repeats a lot, then they don't count as hits, right? You're skipping beats, which is my main issue with Tales of Androgyny. Because if you've played the game once and then you come back and play in a new update, you're like, yeah, look, I've seen it. What's the new thing now? Which is a bit harder because it's not sequential and you could just, through RNG, hit the same notes over and over again. So you have to be mindful of that as well, because that affects some of the longevity of the product. If a player comes into it and plays for a little while and understand what's happening, then you can kind of figure that out. And there's some stuff that you can do to pad sections or cut sections to make the rhythm fit better. Another example I do want to talk about is The Last Romantic. This is a relatively new one. It has like an introduction. And the introduction is all about your character and kind of what you're going through. And then, like, the first kind of scene happens with, like, a tutor or something that shows up. And you're like, okay. And then after that, it goes, all right, here is a mini game. Okay, here is a mini game. Okay, now figure out what you're doing next. And you're like, okay. And so there's, like, it starts off with the heartbeat model, and then it stops and goes, okay, now we're doing a roller coaster. And you're like, all right. And then after that, maybe there's some heartbeats, and then back to a roller coaster while you're like grinding through a mini game or you're trying to figure something out. And sometimes when you're doing the development stuff, you aren't as aware of what the pacing is like, because writing 50 lines of dialogue might be a build, or it might be like a really good hit depending on what CGs you're using. Like Shackles of Elsewhere has a penis measurement series of scenes, but I think they're way too close together for it to be like an actual heartbeat model, because it's like you show up, you're assessed by the witch, there's a measurement scene, there's a cage adjustment scene, then I think you go back to the glory hole, and then like there's a moment of downtime where you go back to your room, and then I think it repeats like that twice. So it's like 2 beats, a drop, 2 beats, or something like that, right? Where it's like pretty steady almost through it. Where it's like, if we had done something to add more, and we still can, but if we had done something more to put downtime in there or build time in there, because with the heartbeat, it's not on and off, right? Like, it's a build and then a drop, and then a build and then a drop. Like, if we did more to build up to each thing, might it make the pacing better for that kind of scene? But how will we know unless we go through and test this kind of stuff or get player feedback? Or it's really hard to assess some of these kinds of things without going and playing the game without going and seeing what it's like from a customer's point of
Yeah.
view. Because if you're playing it and you're like, I'm, not paying attention, or I'm, unfocused. Okay, what is the issue here? Is it because I know it already? Well, someone else is already going to have played the game before and coming back for a second time. Are they still going to have fun doing this?
Yeah, that's a lot of good stuff. And it made me think that, like, I think especially with a lot of porn games, because of that very like personal aspect, something I imagine you have to think about a lot during game dev is like the protagonist, and then also like sort of the choice mechanics. Like, do you want choice mechanics and like different endings and stuff like that? And if so, I think one of the problems I've seen with some, and this goes for visual novels broadly, but especially with like some porn games, is that there are choices, but there's no like real intent behind them other than we feel like we have to include choices. And that at the end is sort of just counterproductive because it just sort of makes it feel like weak. And I think it's okay for a visual novel to be straightforward. They're sometimes called kinetic novels because sometimes you just have a particular story you want to tell and you don't want to write a bunch of different endings for it because you have a particular arc in mind. Because as soon as you introduce multiple endings and choices and things like that, you're thinking about telling your story in a very different way. And similarly, I think that ties into like the protagonist, especially for like a porn game or a dating sim or anything like that. You have to think about like, are we going to make a blank slate sort of self insert? He has no personality, he has no sort of look to him, he's just some guy who's going to fuck a bunch of bitches. Or do you want that character to actually have a personality? And I think a really good example of that is Dona Dona, by Alice Soft. So in that game, you're playing as essentially the leader of sort of like an anarchist group, and the way he gets his money is he kidnaps women and forces them into the sex trade. Really like fucked up stuff. And as a result, rather than making sort of a self-insert protagonist, more like Evanical, who has Aster, who has his own personality, and he's really interesting, but he's also very easy to project onto because he's just sort of this perverted, nice, friendly guy. Um, Kuma from Dona Dona, on the other hand, actually has a very specific characterization where he's like very stoic. He cares a lot about his team members, but he doesn't care about like what means it takes to get to an end. And for me, that made playing the game so much more interesting because I liked seeing how he developed or how he actually dealt with these situations. And it made sense for that game because most people probably don't want to actually imagine themselves doing some of the horrible things he does throughout the game.
I think it's like the Rick and Morty thing, right? Every single person watching Rick and Morty wishes they were Rick when they're actually Jerry or Morty,
Mhm.
right? I think some of these characters can be a power fantasy in a different way, where the character represents something that the audience wishes to be instead of is. It's also fine, and like you follow on their
Yeah.
journey to ascension or power, or in our case, feminization or something like that. Then you following their journey can be immersive without specifically it having to feel like it is you. Like you can instead be jealous for them or something like that.
Mm.
The Prince of Suburbia one I think is interesting because it has its own plot arc thing, which is your landlady, the most fantastic use of air quotes you can imagine, um, has some kind of medical treatment which makes her breast milk, when drunk, make anyone like incredibly horny or something like that.
Hell yeah.
And then it imparts that to the main character, you know, the landlady to the main character. Again, the most insane thing I've ever heard. And then the main character has sex with somebody else, who, in doing that, he passes along the same thing, right? And then this sort of chain of
Okay.
events starts happening where everyone starts being like irresistibly attracted to him because of the wonder drug or chemical reaction or whatever. and you kind of see they're like, we're gonna explain the thing that is never explained in like every harem, which is like why everyone actually cares about the main character, which I thought was kind of cool. But it's like, we're going to use the plot to set up and introduce all these different characters, like the Doctor, and now suddenly, with the big plot reveal, you understand why the Doctor wants to fuck the main character, because they're medically compelled to or whatever. and you're following along the plot beats of everything that's happening. And you don't necessarily have to feel like you are the main character, but you can be like, oh, damn, I wish I was this guy or whatever. Or, man, this is really hot and I, wish that could be me. And you're trying to replace them with you instead of be them. I know that sounds like the same thing. But yeah, I think ours does the same thing because it's hard to specifically feel like you are the main character. In Shackles of Elsven is this Robin, and I feel like Robin is a very specific person. Robin is very quiet, does not talk a lot, and you see this early on with the introduction because the best friend is very chatty. He's incredibly, or trying to be incredibly charismatic and extroverted and all of this kind of stuff. And so in that friend dynamic, Robin is like kind of the quiet one that's just kind of like, yeah, look, and also I am here. And then presented in this world with this really dominant women, the women are like, well, I'm going to tell you what you want, or I'm going to tell you what to do. And Robin's like, this is exactly what I want. This is fantastic. This is everything I've dreamed of. And the goal is for the audience to feel that same way without necessarily having to feel like they are that character.
So jumping off, talking a little bit about protagonists, something I'm actually kind of excited to see, because I do follow a lot of game development. Like, I'm part of a couple of Patreons, I've been part of some Kickstarters, I follow a lot of game devs on Twitter because I like seeing the development. I'm someone who's never really made anything in game dev, but I think the closest I've ever gotten to is I made a story in Twine once in college for fun, and that was cool. Twine's sort of like a choose your own adventure, like text-based thing you can find online. But I've never really had the gumption or the energy to actually think about making a whole game. But I do really like paying attention to game development and different theories about how to do things and talking to game devs. And something I'm looking forward to is right now, Bob is working on her remake of one of the routes from Boyfriend to Death, Straight's route. And I was really impressed with her most recent game, The Price of Flesh, which is sort of only loosely a porn game. It has some NSFW content, but it's much more horror centric. So fair warning if you end up pursuing that game. But what I was always really impressed with her games is the sheer amount of choices and routes and some very specific dialogue that happens if you do like a certain amount of choices in a row. It was really immersive when playing through it because there would be those like little specific pieces of dialogue where if you picked three particular choices, like the character would comment on that. And that's always one of those moments when I'm playing a visual novel, especially where I'm like, oh, I feel really into this story. And she discussed how, with her remake of Straight's route, she wants the protagonist to have a personality that's based on the character's choices. So she's trying to develop a system where, like, basically early on in that route, when you're first meeting Strayed, your choices are sort of going to influence the personality that your character has. Like, are they going to be more of the shy, submissive one who, like, gives up really easily? Are they going to be the bratty one who's fighting back the whole time? Things like that. And that way it'll sort of change some of the dialogue and how he treats you. But also, if your character suddenly starts sort of having a character arc, basically, if like halfway through the game you start making more bold choices, even though you started off as the shy character, like that'll also be something that affects the route and affects how he comments on it. So I'm really excited to see if they're able to sort of make that concept come to fruition, because I think that would be really interesting to see in other visual novels or in other games, like that level of influence that the player can have.
Yeah, because it's a long-reaching arc, right? A lot of the time when you're writing for a character for something like this, you are kind of stuck spending the entire time trying to convince the audience of who this character is. And having it change during that time is hard. But in specifically what you mentioned, a way to do that is to, whenever the player is picking dialogue choices, you will use the game to store a value. So, for example, let's say I pick the submissive and breedable option, then my submissive and breedable score goes up. And then in the next dialogue choice, I pick the incredibly bratty and irredeemable option, and then so on, right? And then when a dialogue tree option happens, it goes, ooh, Straight's about to say something. is the character sufficiently submissive and breedable for this particular outcome? No. Okay. Are they bratty enough for this particular one? And then you can make it basically like a pachinko machine, run through and check all of the options. Okay. Which one most reflects the choices the player has made in the game? And it's basically everything ends up like a block where it sifts through to the correct answer every single time. I've done work on stuff like this, which is really complicated in a way if you're looking at it from the outset. But as you go through and do it, it is really formulaic in how it happens, where the game's just constantly checking for the correct answer every single time. And it gives you a lot more replayability for certain. If the player has more choices and the player has more outcomes, then playing a game a second time is not going to feel like the exact same experience. And like I said this with Tales of Androgyny, right? Like, every time I've played this game, my experience has been relatively the same, except maybe I've encountered one or two more CGs each time before I go, okay, it's been an hour, I still haven't really, gotten that deep yet, or I haven't figured out how to overcome this hurdle in the gameplay, and then kind of moving on. If you're able to find a way where you have many different encounters, or you have many different options that the player can go through, which is kind of like a bunched method, right? In TOA, you're always starting kind of in the same area, and the encounters are separated by area, so you have to travel a great distance naturally to kind of see everything. But if you're always starting in the same spot, then you're going to always start off seeing the exact same things. And if your beginning of a second playthrough is always going to be kind of the same as the third, as the fourth, as the fifth, it's going to be much harder. You're just going to be skipping through. You're going to be trying to get to the end point or the new section point quicker. Some linear-based games will have a thing where it's like, hey, look, we've updated the game more than one time. Would you like to start playing the game at the beginning of the current content? Or would you like to play through from the beginning? Which is a good feature for this kind of thing, because it means you're not spinning your wheels, so to say, to get up to where you're supposed to be up to because you've seen it all or whatever. And especially with Ren'Py, if you have to re-download the game, your scene text isn't stored, so you can't use the auto-skip function without accidentally maybe skipping over something you've seen already.
Yeah, that's like the one thing that sometimes keeps me away from playing a game while it's in early access or while it's still being updated, because part of me is like, I want to sit down and enjoy this when it is a full game and I don't have to worry about like, did I skip over this or not? And, have I seen this before? Like, especially for like, I think like story-based games, I usually just sort of like wait until the very end because I like want to see the full character arcs. For like Tales of Androgyny, I have played a little bit of it because like it's something I personally don't mind mashing through, because I usually just want to see like, okay, what kind of hot stuff do they have this time? And what kind of monster girls have they added? Although I will say, I think Corruptions of Champions does a pretty good job at balancing that. It does still have like you always start off at the same point, but you do have a handful of choices early on that are going to influence things. But like the story is so big and the storylines are pretty like sectioned off. So like if you want to avoid a particular side quest because you're like, I've done that, I don't really care about that character, like it's pretty easy to just not interact with them, to either avoid them or choose the options that will make them go away. But something else I also enjoyed about it is like finding those sort of like unique character interactions where like, oh, because you chose a certain race this time, or because you have a certain feature of your body now because you got transformed in some weird way, you have this like new character interaction with like one of your party members that you didn't have previously. And of course they do also have like the corruption and like how that changes characters. So there was some fun sort of like replaying it. You can also approach it sort of from like different ways. Like, do you want this to be the playthrough where you're super slutty and you let every monster fuck you and you get pregnant a million times and all that stuff? Or do you want this to be like the playthrough where you actually try to like win every encounter and like, only get fucked when you want to and like stuff like that?
The romance arc.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to be wholesome, or do you want to be a fucking whore?
Yeah, I feel that. One of the features that we've done, because we don't have a resume to current content feature, we've got what I have called in the code the brick skipper, where every major milestone in the game is determined by a section by each of the characters, right? So there's like Queen 1, 2, 3, Witch 1, 2, 3, and so on. And when you have completed the game once and you come back and play through a second time, the brick skip opens and it says, where would you like to start, basically. And you can pick any part of the main arcs. And if you know what the new content is or where it is, and you go, oh, I'm just going to go ahead and start at the thing that's before that starts. Which is a bit... because the game is not super linear, it's trident-shaped. If the game was super linear, and I'm like, okay, you started the newest thing, that's fine. I just drop you at where the linear part starts for the new content. But because it's really more dating sim-like, it's a bit harder to do that. And the brick skipper was kind of a compromise, but I also use it as a testing tool so that I can just go, okay, I need to go and look at what the new content is. Cool, I can just jump straight to that and then run through it and check it out. So I think one of the main things in becoming a game dev for adult content is having an understanding of what the product is that you are building, right? And we've talked a bunch about some that do something good, something bad, and how they all kind of come together. But I think the first thing is characters. In the same way as watching an anime, if there's no characters that you care about, then you're going to stop watching. I stopped watching My Hero Academia because the greatest character of all, the school, ceased to be in it after the first season. The setting completely changed. They're no longer at the academia in the title. I'm not interested. Second thing is how the game design elements work. What kind of pacing are you going for? What is the length of the game? Amoris works in the roller coaster method because it's several different paths that are the same kind of length, and each of them end with the adult content. So once you've completed one path, you know exactly what the other ones are going to be like. If it's something more complicated and tangled, like Shackles of Elswyn is, a heartbeat model is more appropriate because it means there's much less downtime, or if they are ramping up the roller coaster and change paths, are they starting another roller coaster and just have so much empty time? And trying to pay attention to what the pacing is and stuff like that. And people want content, so if there is going to be adult content in it, it has to be findable and interactable so that people can actually come and experience it. And then the third thing is just what kind of story are you trying to tell? Shackles of Elswyn is a really easy one. I know I referred to it a lot this episode, but it's a really easy one because the protagonist's journey is the main thing that matters. And of the three paths, it's the protagonist taking a different journey, but guided by a different character in the dating sim. So if you follow the witch path, you'll be transformed into a gorgeous, big titty bimbo character if you wish. And knowing that's the outcome, you can go, yeah, that's exactly what I want. I'm going to run down that path. And then that's like a specific story told about the main character, how they deal with this change, what their new life is like for them, how is it different, changing from what they were before to what they are now, would they ever go back, all these kind of doubts and feelings and stuff, kind of covered in the narrative. And that's the point. In some of these other games where the narrative isn't really well developed or explained, then the player can be wandering around, not really sure what's supposed to be happening. What is my character really doing here? Or it was actually funny, we were talking about FDW before, where both Neko and I confessed that we were much more interested in projecting ourselves onto the other characters instead of the main character in how they were interacting with him. Because their character arcs were more interesting than the main character because he was more like a blank self-insert kind of a thing. And so paying attention to that kind of stuff as well. And if you know what the whole narrative arc is, it's going to be easier to plan out what the pacing is like for these different kind of things. You know, what art am I going to need? What are the characters doing and stuff like that. So planning, working with your artists and asking them what kind of stuff is going to work good, working together as a team, doing all this kind of stuff. And then, like we said in the last episode, all of this is small business stuff where you have to be worrying about your marketing and community involvement and all of that good stuff. And then hopefully you too, loyal viewer, can become a cool game dev just like me, your favorite game dev ever.
We need more porn in the world. You can make us that porn.
Homie, I'm scrolling and it's dead. I'm not finding stuff. People don't make comics as fast as I can read them. People definitely don't make games as fast as I can play them. We're relying on you to make new, good stuff I can beat my shit to. That sounds like
Maybe
a
I'll even
hard
stream your
thing to
game
say.
someday.
Hell yeah, that's it. If you're a lewd game dev, get up in the comments so that we can play your game. And while you're there, hit the like and subscribe button and stick around so that you can hear more cool stuff about sexy business. That's what we do. We're the Sexy Business Podcast. I swear to God, this is not the weirdest thing we've done on the show. It's totally normal. Please subscribe. And we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.